David is a dear friend of mine. He lives out in Waco, Texas, and he and I have conversations over the past decade or so,
Yeah.
usually around family, being a husband, being a father, when it comes to faith and being a
Hmm.
follower of Jesus. We have a variety of conversations, and yet I wonder who your go-to is when it comes to navigating relationships or navigating being a husband and father. I find being a 40-year-old man that David, for me, it's challenging to open up and talk to my buddies that are in a similar age group about the dynamics within my household.
Right.
And so I'm thankful for your friendship, David, and I'm thankful that you're here with us today. And yeah, so David, is there anything that you'd like to share about yourself before we just get started?
I'm a guy with a varied past. Spent 30 years in pastoral or church-related ministry stuff at various levels. But I spent another 20 years or so with a part of that 30 years was with in business, functioning pretty much out of Kansas City, which is where we met. And I was a manufacturer's rep, traveled the Great Plains, and built a territory there, a region there. And then the last 10 years we've been living in Waco. You helped me load my truck and to move, as a matter of fact. And I'm in a sort of in a semi-retired phase of my life. I refer to it as the third half. You know, the first half of my adult life was pastoral ministry. The second half was business, and then the third half is me getting up every day and just learning how to be me. So that's pretty much me.
How long have you been married to Brenda now, David?
In December, Brenda and I will celebrate 45 years.
45 years. Wow.
45 years. Sometimes it seems like, oh my goodness, can it be that long? And other times it seems like, can it be that short?
Wow.
Yeah, married to Brenda, who is the love of my life and who is the perfect complement to me, which basically means we are very different people.
Mm.
The perfect complement to a husband or a wife is not someone who is like them, I think,
Mm-hmm.
but someone who is very different than they are, because none of us have all that we need to have to experience life at its fullest, and we need other input from other people.
I've heard before opposites attract.
Yeah, that's a common thing. Opposite. The quiet person is attracted to the more outgoing person, and the outgoing
Right.
person is more attracted to the quiet person that seems more meditative or whatever. And we are attracted to that, and the chemical things happen, and we fall in love, and then we begin pursuing a relationship together, and then we get married, and after a while, the reality that opposites not only attract but opposites conflict comes to play, and it's we have to begin learning how to live our life in such a way as to make space within it for that other person who's very different, and then oftentimes for the children that come along who are different as well.
So good. I shared with you yesterday that being a husband and being a father is way more challenging than I ever imagined it being. I
Yeah.
thought that, I guess maybe I watched too many movies back in the 90s from Blockbuster where it's all buttoned up and perfect by
Yeah.
an hour and a half when the movie's over.
Yeah.
Yet, I think the thing that surprised me the most, David, is that how much effort and intentionality is required
Yeah.
to have a meaningful, loving home relationship with my children and my spouse. It requires me showing up
Hmm.
and being intentional. And a
Yes.
lot of our conversations, I mean, sometimes we talk and we just kind of, I don't want to say shoot the breeze because that would make light of it, but we just kind of catch up and see what's going
Yeah.
on in each other's lives.
Yes, we do.
But really, for the past few weeks, we've been pretty tactical, meaning I have my notebook. I'm not just driving down the road.
Right.
Like, we're having some conversations where you're helping me navigate some challenges of within my household in particular, how I'm showing up as a husband. Because
Hmm.
one of the things that I'm realizing, the being 40 years old now,
Right.
I feel like I've said that so many times since I've turned 40 6 months
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah.
Being
I
40
know.
years old now, it's like who my kids are in their teenage years.
Right.
They need a different version of me, right? And who my wife requires and who she needs me to be as a husband.
Hmm.
It's an opportunity for me to level up. Meaning, when I say that, I mean go to the next level of being intentional,
Absolutely.
right? So, I mean, we've been working on. I'll just share with you guys one of the things that I've been working on. It sounds super simple, but it's simple. However, far from easy. Is I have a reminder on my calendar to start thinking about my family at 4 o'clock before I leave the office and on the drive home, so I could switch from business mode and everything going on within business
Hmm.
and put on my hat of being a husband and father, so I'm
Hmm.
still not in business driver mode
Hmm.
when I pull up in the driveway. And I'm learning that, man, it's establishing a new habit. It's challenging, even though I get a Google reminder,
Right.
because the rest of the world doesn't get my Google reminder, just me, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so
Right.
I'm still working on being intentional to transition
Yes.
from business mode, problem solver mode, to go home to be the husband my family needs me to be and who I desire to be.
Chris, do you imagine that the first time you tried to use a spoon, you were successful at that?
Highly doubt it.
Highly doubt it. I don't remember that either, but I know for sure I didn't. I didn't do very well. I've got a granddaughter that just turned 1 year old, and she's taking a step or two or three and then falling down. Well, she took 7 or 8 steps the other day, and that was a big deal. You know, there's going to come a point in time in the near future, probably certainly within the next 6 to 8 months, when she'll be walking around the living room and no one will think anything about it. But when she took those 8 steps, that was a big deal. And you are in a process now of learning how to do something you've never done before. And so, in the same way that as a 6 month, 8 month, 1 year old, you were trying to take an implement of some sort and put food in your mouth, well, you got a lot of it outside of your mouth and some of it inside of the mouth, which encouraged you to try it again. And that's how we learn. Even as children, we learn it by trial and error. We learn it by repeating basically the same process again and again to, well, in 6 months from now or a year from now, Colette, who is my 1 year old granddaughter, will be taking a spoon and putting food in her mouth without any problem at all. The learning process in that early stage, however, that's where the challenge comes in. And oftentimes for guys, and particularly guys, if we don't succeed real quickly, really well, we get discouraged and we know, oh, that's not going to
Right.
work. Well, of course it's not going to work because you've only tried it half a dozen times. When you've attempted this 60, 80, 100 times, it'll be a totally different process for you. So it's one of those things of recognizing that I simply don't know everything I need to know. I don't know right now. You know, I use a phrase with guys that oftentimes brings a chuckle. You have to come to the place of recognizing and then embracing the reality that I'm not all that in a bag of chips. You know, there's stuff I don't know. There's things I don't know about how I need to respond to my wife as I'm approaching 70 years old. Well, you should know all that by now. Well, anybody who says that's never been married for a long time. Okay?
Good
I
point.
need I need to learn how to love her at this stage of our lives. And you're having to learn how to love your family at this stage of your life. And here's the encouraging thing and discouraging thing at the same time. This is not the last time you're going to be going through this process. See, you've just turned 40. Your life that you live with your wife and your children, they need the expression of the 40-year-old maturity, but that's not going to work when you're approaching 50. They're going to need the expression of the mature 50-year-old Chris. Now, your kids are going to be at a different stage. Your wife's going to be at a different stage. You're going to be at a different stage. And if we aren't learning how, as men, to actively engage with a purposeful journey of walking into maturity as we grow, we're going to be missing the boat. And it's a challenging thing, particularly for guys who have accomplished some level of accomplishment in their business or in culture or in education. I've got a friend that's a PhD, and he knows his thing. But there are times, and I've told him this, and he agrees, there are times he acts like he's dumber than a stack of lug nuts when it when it comes to dealing with his wife and dealing with his children. Mathematics? Oh yeah, he can handle that. Engineering? Oh, of course, he's prepared himself for that arena. But this arena, the most critical arena, our lives, not so much. And he's behind the curve, and he's recognizing that he's behind the curve, and he's engaging with some things, and I need to read some stuff. I need to do some study. I need to put in some work in the family arena in the same way that I have in the vocational arena or the avocational arena. I know guys that are fishermen and hunters. My son-in-law, who is a hunter and fisher guy, outdoor guy, grew up doing that all the time. And, and some of his buddies, they can name 45 different fishing lures and when they're best to be used and this over here and the best time to fish for the fish and this time of the day. But they haven't got a clue what their wife's favorite color is. Now tell me, that's not going to, at some point, create a challenge that guy doesn't want to deal with. And so one of the things that I wanted to share this morning, you and I were talking about this, is one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was the need for a man to become a dedicated and focused student of his wife. A dedicated and focused student of his wife. I was way behind the curve on this, way behind the curve. Because, not something that my father taught me. I just watched my parents interact and figure out, oh, okay, that's how marriage is. Wrong. It's work. It takes work because you're blending two different people together to form a unit. And one of the things that I say to guys is if you're not actively pursuing a PhD in your wife that's focused on your wife, then you're going to be behind the curve. If you're not behind the curve now, you will be. Because, Chris, this is something you've noticed, because you and I have talked about this. Who you were at 30 years old, that's just, you had been becoming that person for a decade. And I'm just using a decade as a time frame. And your wife and your children at 30 years of age have been sort of coming to that point. Well, I would consider the first 10 years of marriage as a time for a guy to be pursuing a bachelor's degree. A bachelor's degree in marriage, and particularly in marriage with you to your wife, with me to my wife. And I've got to be pursuing. There's stuff you just got to learn, Chris. I mean, you have to learn how to apologize. You have to learn how to own your own stuff. That's a big deal. We tend to want to deflect. Oh, well, if you hadn't done this, then I wouldn't have done that. And if you hadn't said this, then I wouldn't have said that. And see, really, it's your fault because it all started with you. That is a guy who's preparing for destruction in his marriage. He's contributing to destruction in his marriage rather than saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, maybe she did mess up a little bit and say this and that, but it's I got to own my own stuff. Years ago in basketball, particularly in the NBA, in college, when a kid would be called on a foul, when a referee would call a foul or a blocking charge or a hands-in charge, the player was required to raise their hand turn toward the scoring table and raise their hand so they could make sure they got the right number of who the foul was called on. And so, it was an old thing. It eventually has gone away. Technology has made it different, I suppose. But it was about owning your own stuff. Yeah, I did it. I got him. I found it. We tend as men not to want to own our own stuff. And so I lived as an angry man for a long time. Not going to go into the story of why, but it was just there. My kids and I, when we talk about that, they refer to it as the angry years. And I was angry about stuff hadn't turned out the way I wanted them to. Life hadn't turned out the way I wanted it to. And I had this stuff inside of me. Well, the point is, I never owned my own stuff during that time. And through a variety of things and transitions and stuff that God began working in my life, I began to come out of that and realize, oh my goodness, I've been a complete jerk. Now, that was the beginning of me recognizing that I was way behind the curve in terms of understanding my children and understanding my wife. And I was at a point where I really needed to be actively moving from the bachelor's degree, actively pursuing the master's degree, and I hadn't even gotten the bachelor's degree yet. I hadn't even earned an AA, to use a educational metaphor. So it was a rough call for me, and thankfully I had a guy. Thankfully I had an older man in my life. Thankfully I had an older man in my life who had the tendency to ask me inconvenient questions. And he would do this: how long is it going to be before you let go of that? Or he would say, how long do you think it's going to take you to destroy your family acting that way?
Questions.
So my point is this: we as husbands have a responsibility to be owning our own stuff and to be actively pursuing a growing and better understanding of our spouse and our children. And you know what? If you're 30 years, if you've been doing that up until, arbitrarily, say the age 30, then you're preparing yourself to move into the next phase, because you're going to be different at 35, and 37, and 40 than you are at 30. By the time you're 40, you want to be moving into that doctoral pursuit, looking to develop that doctorate degree on my wife. Why is she the way she is? How can I come to understand her better? I need to get some information on this. That kind of focus is the kind of focus that a man can embrace that will totally transform his family.
So PhD on my wife. Could you give me some tactical steps on that one? I got my pen handy.
Okay. Well, let's back up to let me talk through the three levels just to build up to that.
Sure.
A bachelor's degree is where you've come to understand some things about women in general, but your wife specifically. You come to understand they are very different than we are. There was a book I read years ago that sort of introduced this to me, and it was called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus.
Yeah.
I think I might have recommended that to you over the years.
That's right.
And it was like a light bulb. I'm thinking, whoa, oh my goodness, this is true. And it was helpful for me to begin to recognize why so many of our conflicts were coming, because we have a vocabulary and dictionary problem. I use the vocabulary, she uses the vocabulary, but we've got different dictionaries. So the bachelor's degree is recognizing there's a field of study here that is worth my attention. There are topics here. There's understanding here that I just do not have. And if I want to have the blessing of a long-term, healthy, successful, flourishing relationship, I can't simply just live every day as if everything is okay. I've got to give myself to a pursuit of understanding what it means to be the husband that my wife needs. What does it mean to be the father that my children need? And by the time a guy moves into that first 10 years of marriage, he's either getting there or he's not. Having gotten there and recognizing, he's going to recognize, you know what? I need some input. I need some older guys who have been successfully navigating this marriage thing. I need some books. I need some videos to watch. I need to hear from some people who've been doing this more successfully than I have for longer than I have. And that's one of the things that you have done over your life that I've really appreciated. You've recognized, whoa, I don't have a clue about this. I need to seek some input. And so you did. And that's one of the things that you and I have done over the years. So when you get to that first 10 years, the nature of what you're looking for, the nature of what you are engaging with is different. The bachelor's degree is just, frankly, the bachelor's degree in electrical engineering is just an introduction to the topic. Okay? The master's degree is where it gets really practical. And you're learning stuff beneath the surface and you're bringing other things into play. The master's degree is where you're taking information from this source and from this source and learning and finding, okay, well, there's a whole lot here. Oh my goodness, there's a nugget right here that is worth the whole book that I just listened to or read. That nugget. How do I put that into my life? And that kind of approach. It's where you're looking for resources that you don't have. It's learning to embrace humility. It's learning to embrace the reality that I am not all of that in a bag of chips. I'm a guy who needs some help. And so I'm going after that. And that is the kind of thing that sets me up for making changes in my life. It's one of those things that you and I were talking about this the other day. I shared a concept with you that an older brother had shared with me many years ago that was very, very helpful about making the transition from work to home. Because you know what? Your family is probably glad that you do work and you're producing income and you have the level of success that you have and want more of that for you. But they don't want you bringing it home. When you get home, you're not Chris Ward, the real estate guru. You're not Chris Ward, the real estate trainer. You're not Chris Ward, the office supervisor. You're dad. You're honey. You're my husband. The dynamics change when we walk in the door. I never prepared myself for that. I went from the office, drove home, got in, walked in the door. My wife would meet me at the door with a 2-year-old child who is desperately wanting dad. And she says, "Here, he's yours." I wanted to go find the recliner and pull up the newspaper and take 15 or 20 minutes and just sort of decompress from my day of work.
Right.
And that's the thing that you and I talked about. Yeah. And so learning a strategy, not the strategy. Learning that strategy that he taught me that I passed on to you, and we're not going to go into the details of now. Learning that strategy was a huge bump in my ability to be able to engage with my family when I walked in the door. That's the kind of stuff that comes up in the master's program, in that master's degree, from year 10 to year 20. And the thing, by the time you get to year 20, you're probably going to have children that are up in the teen years, probably, could be, but they are definitely moving toward their own independent life. And you are moving toward an empty nest. I had this conversation with a mutual friend of ours, started years ago, and I brought up the idea and I said, how are you preparing for your empty nest? And he looked at me and went, huh? Well, because life hasn't taught us how to prepare for the future very well. We don't prepare very well financially. We don't prepare very well emotionally, and we just simply don't. So that's where those kinds of things begin to come into play. That master's degree prepares you with the details. That next section is that doctorate degree where you're having to go farther and wider and look for more detailed things, particularly in regards to your wife. Now here's the good news and the bad news that most guys really don't want to hear. The good news is that by the time you hit 20 years of marriage, your wife is going to be a different woman than she was when she said, I do. And if you're like most guys, you will be tenaciously clinging to who you were when you said, I do. And the gap between the two of you is going to oftentimes, if you've been staying the guy you were and she's been becoming a different woman, the gap between the two of you can sometimes seem insurmountable. And it can. So recognizing that and beginning to ask the questions, okay, am I becoming the man that my family needs me to be? You know, when you're at 10 years into your marriage, they need a different you than at 5. And by the time you're at 15, and by the time you're at 20 years in your marriage, they're needing a different dad because they're at a different place. She needs a different husband because she's at a different place. Most guys tenaciously cling to the guy they used to be because it requires change. And most of us don't want to do that. I could fail. What happens if I fail? What happens if I mess it up? Well, here's the bad news. You are going to fail. You are going to mess it up. But if you're not on the journey, if you're not pursuing, it'll be worse. So understanding, go ahead.
For me, I meet people, I'll walk up and just like when I met you, it was at Starbucks, yeah. Right? I overheard a conversation. I have no issues inviting myself into a conversation and then asking for somebody's phone number. Where I know some people where it's like, man, there's just no way I would ever butt into somebody's conversation, let alone ask another grown man for his phone number.
Yeah.
Yet I'm wondering what advice would you give somebody when if they, after hearing you, it's clear that they're missing a David or a who in their life. What advice would you give to them if they feel like, man, I don't have a David. What can I do?
Yeah. Well, you didn't have a David either.
That's true.
But you made the choice to take a risk, and the risk turned out to be a real benefit for you. And I had a choice. Do I want to get involved with this guy? Because, I got other stuff going on. I got, okay, do I want to do that? And I made the choice to take the risk to get involved with you, and it's been a real blessing for my life. Most of the times, whenever I've responded to a request or I have sought out someone to engage with and to see if a relationship could develop, most of the time it has been a blessing in my life. So I'm always open to the possibility. I don't ever have an expectation that any of those relationships or those initial conversations are going to turn into a lifelong friendship. I don't have that expectation because oftentimes it doesn't. But it's for a season or it's for a particular issue.
Right.
And I learned a long time ago that this is the sweet spot of my life, Chris. This is the sweet spot of my life. Engaging in conversations and developing relationships with men who are looking to build and grow and develop and looking to move from where they are to don't even know. Prior to our recording today, I had a meeting with a guy in a coffee shop, which is where I do most of my stuff, with a guy that I have met previously, and we've been getting together at least once a month, sometimes every 3 weeks or so, and simply talking about life. That is my sweet spot. So, and I'm not the only guy out there like that. If a guy says, man, I'd love to have a conversation with somebody who could speak into my life like that, well, it isn't going to happen by sitting around saying, boy, I'd really love to have a conversation with someone. That would be great. Well, I wish there was somebody that I could have a conversation with. That would be wonderful. I wish, today is Friday, I wish that I could have a conversation. Listen, we can sit around all day recognizing that there needs to be some adjustment and needs to be some change. And if we don't put on our shoes and start taking a step in a direction, we're always going to be sitting where we were, wishing things were different. Here's the thing I would suggest to a guy. Who do you know that's a bit farther down whatever path you're on? Who do you know? Who do you recognize? Who do you see that you think, man, I think that guy has more understanding than I do, and I'm going to see if we can have coffee together. I'd love to buy him a cup of coffee or buy him a Coke or whatever, and just say, look, I'm looking for somebody who might have some input into my life. Is that something that you would be interested in doing? I did that once with a guy shortly after we moved to Kansas City because I had recognized these things in my own life at the time. And I met with him and bought coffee and we talked. We had a good time together. And I said to him, is there any way that we could do this on a regular basis? And he said no. And I he's a Christian, I'm a Christian. You're not supposed to say no. You're supposed to say yes. And he said, I don't think that I'm the guy that's going to be best able to help you, David, or best able to fit with what you're doing. And he was wise enough to know some things about himself and to know, we use the term today, bandwidth, and he was saying, look, at this point right now, I don't have the bandwidth. You know what? Getting together occasionally and having some coffee or whatever, absolutely. But to develop an ongoing discipling relationship, I just simply don't have the bandwidth for that now. But somebody does. And you need to keep your eyes open and keep looking, and I'll give it some thought. Well, a few weeks later, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, I think I know someone who might be able to connect with you." And see, he gave me the guy's number. He said, "I've talked to him," and I said, "This guy's probably going to call you, so get together." And he did. We got together and had coffee, and he and I became great friends. He was closer in age to me than the other guy was, but we met together on a monthly basis for several years. Sometimes more so. And I was able to learn from his journey. He was probably 10 years about beyond where I was. The other guy was 25 years down the road. And the gap didn't work for where he was and where I was then. Here's my point. If you're desiring to connect with an older brother who can speak into your life, you need to be on the hunt for that. There's this principle in the scripture that talks about asking and seeking and knocking. And I encourage you to be asking and to be seeking and to be knocking and to really just simply ask the Lord, hey, help me to connect with what I need in this season of my life. And then go about looking. Keep your antennas up. Keep saying, okay, it may not be the first person you talk to. It wasn't with me. But what came out of that turned into a great friendship that lasted a long time. And we were a blessing to one another, and we were brothers until we had moved from Kansas City. He died just a few years after that. But he's gone to be with the Lord. But he made a great deposit into my life.
Yeah, so good.
So ask and seek and knock.
Yeah. I've heard before, David, that when the student is ready, the teacher
Mm,
appears.
yeah,
It's just amazing. The verse that you talked about, I know it's mentioned in a few different places, and yet on a, I don't have my wallet in here, otherwise I'd pulled out right now. On a 3x5 card, I would say for the past decade, I've had several versions of it because eventually it falls apart. But
sure.
I wrote out, ask and it will be given, seek, keep seeking, keep asking, keep knocking.
Yes.
Because I believe it's important for me to, I feel like it's a life hack, actually. One
Oh,
of the things that
absolutely.
I picked up along the way somewhere is that there's people in life, whether it's financially,
Hmm.
whether it's in relationships, whether it's with fitness or
Hmm.
whatever the category, like, man, if there's an area I really don't care for the results I'm getting or not getting,
Right.
I could seek out whether it's a book or relationship with somebody in real life or today a podcast or YouTube
Yes.
video, whatever, I could seek out someone that knows more than me, that has more experience. And that's one of the
Mm.
things that I appreciate about you, David, that we talk about this all the time. We're both two men on a journey. And
Yes.
even though I show up and I have my notebook ready, just like a student would in school back in the old
Right.
days,
Hmm.
and yet for me it's I appreciate the fact that like you're not a know-it-all. You'll be the first to admit that you
Oh,
haven't arrived. You still have challenges and relationships, and yet you're fully committed to your wife and being a grandpa and a husband and all the hats that you wear. And so for me, I want to thank you for just being transparent, David, because I think if you just came off as far as like I'm a pro, I got this figured out, take notes, you're welcome, like that
hmm.
probably would be off-putting. And yet your kindness, your gentleness.
Mm.
I was thinking about this because I started a new journal a few weeks ago just for your and I's conversation. Where, man, some of this stuff it's taken me almost 15 years to actually open up and just say, David, here it is, man. Where it's taken some time. So thank you for being you and be open
Yes.
to
Well, thank you, Chris.
investing time. And I mean, back 15 years ago or so when we met, we didn't have a master plan to stay in
Right.
touch. I didn't say, hey, David, I like what you're saying. Will you mentor me the next decade and a half? That probably
Right.
would have been a little too much. But I
Hmm.
have been pretty intentional to, every few weeks, like, hey, David, was thinking about you, man. Just taking what I heard you say when I asked that question is I wrote down, make a choice or make a decision and then seek after someone. Don't be passive about it, meaning I sit back and just wait, hope, and pray. Like actively take a next step to
Hmm.
pursue the person or pursue the information or whatever it is that I think would be helpful.
Yes.
Take the
And,
initiative.
and there may be a group situation that you could get involved in initially
Mm.
if you're not involved in any of these kinds of things that I've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind I'm a former pastor. I'm a retired pastor guy. My frame of reference is that, but it's not limited to that. But
Mm-hmm.
there may be a group of guys that you could plug in and connect with that meet once a month and just sort of begin developing some relationships that way. I mean, there's a number of ways to go about doing it. Here's the thing that we can all be confident of. If I don't take some steps to move me from where I am, I'm going to always be right where I was. And it's important that I take on the responsibility of initiating the ask and the seek. The ask and because if I'm not asking, if I'm not asking and seeking, then I'm just going to stay right here. If
Yeah.
I'm not asking, if I'm not knocking, if I'm not looking for the opportunity, if I'm not saying, okay, I want an opportunity, I want things to be different, I want to engage in a journey, and I want to engage with someone who can provide some help for me along the way, um, I'm going to wait for them to come up and knock on my door.
Right.
Well, that is one approach,
Yeah.
but it's not the kind of approach that's going to produce the results that you want to see happening in your life. Because here's the reality. That first 10 years of marriage is coming. That second 10 years of marriage is coming. There comes a point in the life of a relationship where if you haven't been making the adjustments that you need to make in order to grow into the guy that you need to be and that your family needs, there comes a point where you're going to be so far behind the curve that your marriage is going to be in danger. And I'm not saying you're going to wind up divorced, but there are more marriages where the lack of life defines who they are, rather than the vibrant life of that is available. See, I never imagined, and I've told you this several times in the past, I never imagined that at this stage of my life I would be experiencing the vibrancy and the vitality and the blessing of living life the way I am. I mean, I get up and go to work every day because that's who I am. I'm engaging with guys that I'm dealing with, and I'm writing, and I have a solid relationship with my wife. I have a great relationship with my kids and grandkids. I look around the different components that make up my life, and I'm going, wow. And here's the thing. I could not have made those things happen. But they would not have happened apart from my learning to engage with God and to connect with other guys who are on this journey, and my learning how to discover His realities in my life that have helped me, and this is an important thing, that have helped me learn how to get up every morning and go out and face the world knowing that the only thing I really need to be concerned about is being me. That's a powerful thing. To know that I can get up every day and go be David. I get to go be David. That it hasn't always been true in my life. In the first half of my life, and the first half of the second half of my life, I got up every day and tried to figure out who I needed to be based upon the expectations of other people, the expectations of God on me, the expectations of my industry and my business and my boss, and always never having any sense of connectedness to the reality of who I am, who God's made me to be. I just didn't know. I was getting up every day and trying to do the best that I could. You know what? That's better than not trying to do the best that you can, but it's not even close to the reality of what life can be. It just isn't. I can get up in the morning and head out the door knowing I'm headed to the bus barn, and there's 50 people there that I know, and most of whom, and I don't know, maybe I'm going to be able to speak a word of encouragement in someone's life, or just simply say hello and pat them on the back, laugh at a story and engage and give them a sense of community. Work with a bunch of screaming kids on an elementary school bus, and how am I going to deal with that? And deal with them in such a way that I know that I know this is the good thing for me. Here's the thing. Here's the thing that flows up out of my heart about me coming and learning how to be me. The thing that flows out of my heart when I'm in that zone, and I'm not always in that zone. Sometimes I'm kind of grumpy, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, I'm in that zone where you know what? I get to go be David today. Not because I'm trying to, but because that's who I am. Here's the thing that always rises up in me, Chris, and this is the recent thing, past year or two. How can I give a clear expression of God's love to these people in this moment? How can I give a clear expression of God's love to these people in this moment? And here's the thing that I've learned about that. I don't have a clue. Because the expression that I gave yesterday or the day before or whatever in that situation doesn't apply here. These are different people, different situation. How can I give a clear expression of God's love in this moment? to these people? That's the question that comes up in me, and that's the question that I'm saying, excuse me, saying, Father, if it's going to happen at any significant level, it's going to happen from beyond me, because I don't have this. I don't have a clue how I can give the clearest expression of your love to these people in this moment. Please help me. Listen, you can't think like that if you're busy trying to figure out the person you need to be like in order to please your boss. Because you don't get the freedom or the chance to be you. You're trying to be the you that he wants you to be. Or how can I bring that attitude into my marriage, into my family? Because I can't do that if I'm trying to be the me that she wants me to be, or that they need me to be. And I've got this idea of what it means to be the best dad in the world. That's crazy. There is no best dad in the world other than God. But you know what? Here's the amazing thing, Chris. God has placed within you the capacity to express his love to these people in this moment, because you're simply being Chris Ward. Now that is a journey worth making. It's a journey worth making. It's going to include success, and it's going to include failure. You're going to get yourself knocked down on your butt. You're going to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and go back into it. Because the reality of life in Christ is asking and expressing that answer again and again and again. Living life in such a way, Chris, that you get up every day and you get to go be Chris Ward. And the thing that's in your heart is, how can I best express? How can I give a clear expression of the love of God to these people, or to this person in this moment? I tell you this, buddy. If you can learn to latch on to that idea as a seed that's within your heart as you go live your life every day, it'll change your life. It just will. Learning how to cooperate with God's primary desire of expressing his love to the people of the world. Learning how to cooperate with what he's up to. That's what Jesus did. Jesus said this, and I'm not going to preach, so I'm going to say you this. Jesus said, I see what the Father's doing, and I get involved in that. I hear what the Father's saying, and that's what I learn to say. And so this idea of being a husband, of being a man in the world, the business world, the education world, of being a father to my children, being a husband to my wife, being a friend to the other guy. It all comes down to learning how to get up every day. And this is not a simple journey. This is not a simple journey. Learning how to get up every day and just go be you. With that attitude of cooperating with whatever it is God's up to. That's the portion of the journey that I've been on for the past couple of years, and learning how to do that. And I'll be on it for the rest of my life. So it's
That's incredible. I mean, that's definitely a different approach,
yeah, yes, it
to say
is.
the least.
Well, it's not the approach. It's not the approach that I use for most of my life. It's a new
Yeah.
thing for me as an old guy, almost old guy.
I love that it's focused on part of what you said about, I'll put it in my words, what's the most loving, how can I love the person in front of me right now?
Mm-hmm.
What's the way I could love them in a way that would show the love of Jesus? Maybe another way to put it. Like,
Absolutely.
it's so outward focused, and just observing my own life and the lives of others, there's kind of a message out there where it's like, the older you get, the sicker you get, the lonely you get, and yet in knowing you, one of the things that I just love about you, David, is you're passionate. You're passionate about, I've noticed you have an outward focus of others, and it even shows up in that question where your concern and focus is not about you and yourself. And I think it's changed. I mean, it sounds like it's changed your life, to say the
It
least.
has.
And yet your attitude is so um, contagious, and it's clear that you're living an abundant life, abundant in joy and in relationship with others. It's just, yeah, I mean, you stand out. So I feel like you're peeling back a layer to show me a behind the scenes of what's going on a heart level that's
Mm.
causing the overflow of the joy I see pour out of me, man.
I can tell you, Chris, I never imagined, and I mentioned this earlier, I never imagined I would be thriving
Mm.
at this stage of my life. Frankly, I never thought about thriving at any stage of my life. I was primarily concerned with getting by.
I don't know if you could see that, but I wrote down the word thrive yesterday. And
Yeah.
that's a word to ponder on.
Yeah.
Thrive. What does it look like to thrive?
Yeah.
So, David, we're definitely going to have to um, have a part two, three, four series, whatever you
Love
call
to.
it. Is there any final points that you'd like to make, or anything that you would like to share when it comes to PhD, master's degree, bachelor's degree, when it comes to in particular of being a husband, and then also I don't want to forget, so I'm gonna mention it now. Please make sure to share how, if something that you said resonated with someone out there, where they could take a next step and get to know you more. Here, I know you have a podcast, you have content you create.
Hmm.
So how could somebody get in touch and go find you?
I will answer the first question first.
Okay.
The one thing that I want to, if nothing else, if nothing
Hmm.
else clicks, and that's entirely possible. Well, if nothing else clicks, please hear me say this. The most important thing you can do today is recognize the need that's there in your life, whatever that particularly might be. But as it relates to the topic we've been talking about here, recognize the need. Recognize that you do not have the resources that you need to engage with that need and to make a long-term successful journey. You simply don't have it. Nobody does. And then the third thing, that would you would take the risk to begin asking and seeking and knocking for some help. And go before the Lord, go before God, say, I've done that. I need help. And if that's the only prayer you can pray, that's a perfect prayer to pray. I need help. I can't tell you how many times that comes up with me. I've been engaging on this journey for a long time, and I don't have what it takes, guys, and you don't either. So raise my hand and say, yep, I don't have what it takes. Will you help me on this journey?
That's good.
That's the thing that I would encourage you, if nothing else clicks. And as for getting in touch with me, if you Google David Higginbotham podcast, I tested it again yesterday. The top thing that came up for me was me. Um, I have a podcast called Learning to Thrive, the Learning to Thrive podcast. We've been exploring a variety of things that do contribute to this the journey of learning to thrive. You can hear some stuff there if you want to listen to some podcasts and sort of get a bigger picture of my perspective on some things with my podcast partner. If you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do that. David Higg TX, since I'm now in Texas. David Higg, Higg, David Higg TX at gmail.com. Happy to engage with you, happy to converse with you, happy to have a phone conversation, try to point you in a direction that I think might be helpful or whatever. I can tell you this, what Chris and I do in terms of our conversation and relationship, what I do with the guy this morning who is becoming a good brother, and we're just having a good relationship, and I'm helping him on his journey. That is what I do. That is my sweet spot. I spent 30 years of various types of ministry in various aspects of the church, finally came to the conclusion that I just really couldn't do that anymore. And then after a long period of time of realigning my life and getting my relationship with my wife and my kids in better order and getting my life in better order, I've come out of that period, and now frankly, you know what I do? I do this. Chris, the conversation that we've had this morning, how much is that alike the conversations that we typically have?
100%. This is it.
That's just how we. And
Yeah.
it's such a blessing to me that I get up every day and go be me.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
Godspeed to you. I'll leave that with you.
So my takeaway from today, David, is continuing to be an intentional student of my wife.
Yes.
We're high school sweethearts, and we worked in a grocery store when we met in Grandview, Sunfresh grocery store. And we have this box that has all of this stuff from prom in high school and all these different things.
Yeah.
That's starting to look old and vintage now. And one of them is a notebook. You remember those little spiral notebooks that you put in your front pocket?
Yeah.
I don't even know if they make those still. And yet I had one of those, and it's in that box. And I was flipping through that, and I wrote all these questions in there, David, it would have been either when I was a senior in high school or the year after. No, it was when I was a senior in high school. And I was reading what I wrote and then the answers. I had all the questions in like a blue pen color. What's her favorite color? What's her favorite food? What's her favorite dessert? And it was almost creepy, man, where it was like 100 questions that I wrote out. And then you would see, because it was different pens on different days, one by one, I went in there and I filled out the answers to those questions. So it reminds me of, like, go back to the beginning. When I was in the mode of pursuing and hunting.
That's
and going
good.
after, like, remain curious about who my wife is now.
That's really good, Chris.
That's my takeaway from our time today, David. So thank you for that.
With one final caveat.
Yeah.
To you and any other guy who happens to be listening here. Pursuing that bachelor's degree and pursuing that master's degree and pursuing that PhD that focuses on your wife is about her. It's not about you. It's not about you being treated differently or getting a fun night, or it's not about any of those things. It's about you learning how to be the man, to be the husband, to be the friend, to be the confidant that she needs at that stage in her life. That's what it's about.
Wow.
See, that has the fragrance of love with it. Because love is always about the other person. That's the last caveat. I'm not going to say another thing, Chris.
Well, I mean, David, with that being said, I could do the thing, meaning being a student of, and yet what I hear you saying, it's about the heart's intent, right?
Yes. This is not so you'll have better sex.
Mm-hmm.
This is not so she won't complain when you want to buy that motorcycle. Mm-hmm. This is not so you can go off for a weekend fishing more often than you could if you weren't treating her better. It's none of those things.
That's a good point.
It's about loving her and planting in her the seeds of love and acceptance and forgiveness and cherishing. It's all of those things that you give to her, for her, about her. See,
wow.
that's when the PhD is coming into play.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Bless you, buddy.